Okay, let's unpack this.
Hmm.
We are diving into a behavior that is subtle, it's persistent, and frankly, it touches almost every aspect of modern life.
Yeah.
From how we use our phones or social media to the choices we make in our deepest relationships. It's this constant hum of like, am I enough?
Yeah, absolutely. Today, we're doing a deep dive on exactly that, this pervasive human need for approval and validation. And importantly, the serious psychological costs we pay when we start relying, too much on external sources to define our self-worth.
Right. Our listeners shared, a massive stack of sources on this, trying to understand why this constant craving for affirmation feels so fundamentally exhausting.
It is exhausting.
So our mission today is really to distill these findings, kind of sift through them, and give you a clear path out of what licensed therapists and psychologists are actually calling a dangerous habit.
And even more starkly, a hidden epidemic.
A hidden epidemic. That's
Yeah.
strong language.
It is, and that phrase, hidden epidemic, it's a crucial starting point, I think. It refers to this trend where, well, more and more people are comparing themselves to others
Constantly.
constantly and seeking validation from the outside world. It's a pattern that kind of paradoxically causes them to devalue themselves. They're essentially outsourcing their internal barometer,
Yeah.
their sense of success and happiness.
And if you need like tangible evidence of this outsourcing, look no further than the near universal social media experience.
Right,
Right.
absolutely. It
Okay.
just exacerbates this whole cycle. It turns approval into this measurable currency. The likes, the comments, the shares.
Yeah.
One therapist we reviewed, Parna Sagaram, she noted that for many people, decision-making stops being about what's best for you anymore.
Right.
And instead, it becomes entirely about what's maybe best for how others will perceive you, which is a huge shift.
Okay, so to ground our discussion, let's define the psychological landscape here. Let's get the terms right. First, validation itself.
Right. Validation in its pure form is a fundamental human need. It's the need for acceptance, for understanding, connection.
Like feeling heard, seen.
Exactly. That basic, essential desire to feel heard and seen by another person.
Yeah.
If you tell a friend you had a really bad day and they respond with genuine empathy, that's healthy validation.
Okay, so that's the core healthy component. It confirms our reality, our right to exist in a way,
Absolutely. It anchors us. The pathology, the problem, arises with external validation,
which is.
which is relying on affirmation, approval, or acknowledgement from others, specifically to bolster our self-esteem or a sense of worth.
Ah, okay.
So when the core of your identity gets tied to the reactions of people outside your control, well, you become instantly vulnerable, right?
Yeah, completely. Okay, so the initial desire for acceptance is normal. Maybe even like biologically hardwired for social creatures like us.
Mm-hmm.
But when this external dependence becomes excessive, when it becomes the only source of feeling okay, what does that over-reliance signal about what's going on inside?
Well, that excessive reliance, it signals deeper chronic psychological issues usually. The need for constant external affirmation is often a coping mechanism
For what?
for things like chronic low self-worth, anxiety, or even underlying depression. Clinical psychologist Dr. Ramona Leahy really emphasizes that consistently relying on the external world actively hinders us
Hinders us from what?
from developing a strong, resilient internal sense of self. You basically become a psychological mirror, just reflecting whatever external light source happens to be strongest at that moment instead of, generating your own light.
Okay, so if the chronic need for approval is the symptom, we have to look at the foundation it's built on. And our sources point directly toward, well, insecurity and our early life environment.
Exactly. Insecurity in psychological terms, it's that experience of feeling unsafe or uncertain within ourselves.
Inside.
Inside, yes.
Uh.
And when we look at the origins, professionals often cite unresolved trauma, or maybe more commonly, unmet emotional needs during our formative years.
So things that happened when we were kids.
Often, yes. This lack of fundamental safety, it creates an internal state of hypervigilance. You're constantly scanning the environment
For danger.
either for threats or, conversely, for signs of approval that can momentarily calm that inner feeling of uncertainty, like a quick fix.
And if that uncertainty isn't resolved internally, low self-esteem is kind of the predictable result, right?
Yeah.
Which then spirals into these unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Precisely. We see that physical and emotional insecurities are direct causes of attention-seeking and validation-seeking behavior. It's an unhealthy, really high-effort attempt to stabilize what feels like a fractured sense of self.
So, to understand why the self feels fractured, we really have to discuss the profound influence of childhood environments, parenting styles specifically.
Yes, clinical research clearly outlines how the conditions of our upbringing can, well, hardwire us for this lifelong pattern of approval addiction.
And it's important to clarify this isn't always rooted in obvious neglect, right? Sometimes it's the opposite.
Often, yeah. Often the culprit is excessive control, but it's kind of masquerading as care.
I don't know.
About controlling parents. Sometimes they get labeled authoritarian or, helicopter parents.
Right.
And they often, in an effort to manage their own anxiety or maybe achieve their own unmet goals through their children, they unintentionally stunt the child's emotional independence.
So the kid never learns to trust themselves.
Exactly. Which makes them approval-seeking well into adulthood.
How does that happen? What are the methods?
It happens through several kind of insidious methods that teach the child their value is conditional, not inherent.
Okay.
One is setting high, often truly unattainable standards. The child quickly learns that anything less than perfection is, well, unacceptable. The messaging is, you are loved if you succeed.
Which ties directly to the idea of conditional love.
Precisely. Conditional love is withholding affection or approval when those unrealistic standards aren't met. Think of a parent whose praise is reserved only for the top score on a test, but who barely notices the child's efforts in, say, hobbies or friendships. Things the child actually enjoys. The child learns to perform for love, not for intrinsic satisfaction or joy.
Wow. It seems like that constant performance would just drain the energy needed for genuine self-discovery.
Yeah.
Like, who am I if I'm not achieving?
It absolutely does.
Uh-huh.
Additionally, we see controlling behavior manifest through rigid rules. Rules enforced without explanation, without flexibility, it stifles the development of independent judgment.
You just learn to follow orders.
Right. But perhaps the most damaging tactic cited in the sources is psychological manipulation, often using guilt, shame, or even gifts as leverage.
Okay, give us an example of that gift manipulation. That sounds particularly confusing for the person on the receiving end.
Oh, it creates enormous psychological debt. For instance, a parent might offer to pay for something really big, say a car,
Okay.
but only if the adult child agrees to attend a specific, maybe closer college, or chooses a career path the parent prefers.
Ah, strings attached.
Big strings. They are controlling a major life decision under the guise of generosity. The underlying message is, my money, and therefore my approval, my love, is contingent upon you conforming to my desires.
Wow.
It's a profound betrayal of the child's autonomy. It teaches them that their own choices, their own desires, are secondary to getting that external approval.
And this chronic need for external guidance, for affirmation, it leads directly to one of the core drivers of relational insecurity in adulthood, attachment styles.
Yes, attachment theory is key here. It shows us how the consistency or lack thereof of caregiving in early life shapes our adult patterns in relationships.
Right?
While a secure attachment provides the stability needed for self-validation later on, the style most strongly linked to excessive external validation is the anxious, preoccupied attachment style.
Right. Anxious, preoccupied. And this style develops. How? Not from consistent neglect, you said.
Right, it develops from inconsistent, unpredictable meeting of needs. So sometimes the caregiver was fully present, warm, responsive. Other times, maybe they were distant, preoccupied, emotionally unavailable. That inconsistency creates deep confusion and doubt in the child.
Like, can I rely on this? Am I worthy of consistent love?
Exactly. Is the world reliable? Am I worthy? That inconsistency basically wires the individual to have a strong craving for connection, yes, but also persistent anxiety about rejection and abandonment.
So they're always worried the rug's going to get pulled out.
Always. And an unquenchable need for constant validation. They live in a state of high emotional arousal in their relationships. It's exhausting.
So what does that look like in daily adult behavior? How does that inconsistency manifest in their interactions?
Well, the consequence is severe emotional reliance. The anxious, preoccupied individual relies almost entirely on external relationships, romantic partners, maybe close friends, to fulfill their inner sense of self-worth.
So their mood depends entirely on how the other person is acting.
Completely. Their core identity becomes unmoored, constantly shifting based on a partner's transient behaviors or moods. If a text isn't returned promptly, they might spiral into catastrophic thinking about abandonment. They hate me, they're leaving me. They might even test their partner by picking fights or displaying exaggerated emotional distress just to provoke a reassurance response, to make the partner prove they still care.
So they end up kind of molding themselves to the person they're dating, often having a really low opinion of themselves and this disproportionately high opinion of the partner, believing the partner is the only one who can save them or make them feel okay.
Precisely that. They get trapped in this self-fulfilling prophecy. They desperately seek the approval their childhood environment didn't reliably provide,
Yeah.
but they seek it with such intensity and insecurity, the constant neediness, the testing, that it often pushes the very people they rely on away, which of course reinforces their original fear of abandonment. It's a tragic cycle.
Okay, so when this dependency becomes ingrained, it takes enormous effort just to maintain that external facade. And the primary mechanism we see, the most common maybe, is people-pleasing.
Right. And people-pleasing is far more than just being polite or accommodating. It's being, pathologically concerned with pleasing others and constantly trying to earn approval just to maintain relationships.
There's a term for that.
Yeah, psychologists refer to this personality trait as sociotropy. It means an excessive investment in interpersonal relationships and an over-reliance on external feedback for your self-evaluation.
Okay. So what are the signs, the high-effort signs that our listener might recognize in themselves or maybe in others?
Well, the signs are really about sacrificing the self. You have real difficulty saying no, even when a request is deeply inconvenient or maybe even inappropriate.
You feel bad saying no.
Terribly guilty. Overwhelming guilt and selfishness when you try to assert your own needs.
Right.
So consequently, you neglect your own self-care, your own preferences. You end up agreeing to things you don't actually like, from, movie choices to major career paths. And fundamentally, you find yourself constantly pretending to agree with people, even when your internal feelings or convictions are completely different. You become a chameleon.
That sustained pretense sounds absolutely exhausting, and it creates what you might call an authenticity deficit, right? You lose touch with yourself.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
The cost is the profound sacrifice of authenticity. The people pleaser is constantly hiding their true needs, opinions, preferences to accommodate others.
Mm.
It leaves them feeling drained, stressed,
Mm-hmm.
and critically, they might reach a point where they genuinely do not know themselves at all
Mm-hmm.
because they've spent so long being what others want.
Yeah.
They're working ceaselessly to earn what should ideally be freely given,
Mm.
love and belonging. And the people they tend to attract are often those who require someone to constantly yield to them, ironically.
Right, it feeds into itself. Okay, so if people-pleasing is trying to secure love by conforming, what about the more aggressive or achievement-oriented ways we try to earn value? Karen Harney's theory of neurotic needs seems relevant here.
Oh, absolutely. Horney's work provides a fantastic framework for this.
Yeah.
She proposed that our basic anxiety coping strategies, if they're overused, can solidify into problematic neurotic needs.
Okay.
And she categorized these approaches based on how an individual fundamentally deals with others.
Hmm.
Are they moving toward others, away from others, or against them?
So the need for affection and approval, that falls under moving toward others, right? That's the traditional people-pleasing we just discussed.
Exactly. That need is characterized by a submissive, compliant desire to be universally liked and an extreme sensitivity to rejection or criticism. They're terrified of hostility and conflict, so they bend over backwards to avoid it.
But the really interesting manifestation of insecurity here is the neurotic need for perfection, which Horney kind of counterintuitively framed as moving against others. How is being a perfectionist an aggressive act?
Yeah, it seems odd at first, but it's seen as an aggressive posture against the world like a shield. The neurotic need for perfection and, crucially, unassailability. It's driven by a profound basic insecurity and a terrifying fear of failure.
So they're trying to be untouchable.
Exactly. Their entire value gets tied exclusively to flawless performance.
Mm.
They are moving against the vulnerability of being human, of making mistakes.
So the goal isn't necessarily just to do a good job for its own sake, but to prevent the world from finding any cracks in the facade, to avoid criticism.
Precisely. It's defensive. And this pursuit creates paralyzing self-doubt because, of course, nothing ever feels truly good enough. Perfection is impossible.
Right.
The fear isn't just of failure itself, but of being exposed as incapable. That's the deep dread.
Ah.
So neurotic perfectionists push themselves relentlessly to achieve more and more, constantly topping earlier successes, because failure isn't merely a setback for them. It feels like an irrefutable public defeat that undermines their entire sense of self. It confirms that hidden inadequacy they secretly fear.
So their constant striving is an attempt to silence that internal voice of shame, basically using external achievement as a weapon against it.
That's a great way to put it,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. And as we move even further along the spectrum of unhealthy coping, we arrive at the really toxic end, where validation-seeking behaviors become outright harmful to others, the attention seekers, and ultimately what people call emotional vampires.
Right. Attention-seeking behaviors are specifically designed to garner immediate focus, and they're often wildly disproportionate to the actual situation.
Like what? What kind of things?
They can manifest as, say, feigning helplessness in situations you know the person is perfectly capable of handling, or deliberately causing unnecessary conflict just to create a dramatic scene where they're the center.
Stirring the pot.
Exactly. Or lying or embellishing stories just to get a guaranteed reaction, whether it's awe or pity.
And often this includes constantly looking for compliments or sympathy, right? Fishing for them.
Oh, constantly. For example, always needing compliments about their appearance after every minor change of outfit, or playing up a very small injury like a minor scrape with extreme emotional language, seeking urgent sympathy and reassurance.
Oh, the pain.
Right. They are essentially feeding off the emotional reaction of others, whether that reaction is positive or negative. Attention is attention.
Okay, so the emotional vampire seems to take this pattern and weave it into their fundamental way of relating to people, just draining the energy of everyone around them.
They absolutely do. Emotional vampires drain social and psychological energy because their core dependency requires constant attention and often constant crisis.
Drama follows them.
It does. Our sources indicate they typically exhibit significant low self-esteem issues coupled with a specific, profound lack of self-awareness. They seem to lack three crucial pillars of psychological health simultaneously.
Okay, let's break those three lacks down clearly. What's the first lack?
The first is that excessive, disproportionate need for validation and attention we've been talking about. Conversations are invariably dominated by them.
All about them.
All about them. Often swinging wildly between two extremes. Delusional grandeur, I'm the smartest person in this room, my problems are the biggest, or pathetic helplessness, woe is me, I can't even open this jar, everything bad happens to me. They monopolize the social airtime, demanding to be the gravitational center of every interaction.
Okay. And when this needy behavior inevitably pushes people away or, elicits frustration, what's their response? How do they handle that?
Well, that leads directly to the second lack.
Yeah.
The core belief that their problems are never their fault.
Ah, the blame game.
Always. When their neediness or self-absorption elicits negative reactions, they immediately externalize the blame. They prefer to believe everyone else is cold or jealous or cruel. Rather than examining their own contribution to the negative dynamic, they become perpetual victims.
That self-victimization must be incredibly exhausting to deal with as a friend or partner, and it must reinforce the whole destructive cycle for them too.
It does. Which brings us right to the third lack, self-awareness. Because they are so intensely focused externally on what others are giving them, or more often denying them, they seem incapable of recognizing their own self-defeating pattern.
They can't see it.
They can't see it. This creates an insidious feedback loop.
Yeah.
The excessive need leads to antisocial or draining behavior, which leads to negative reactions from others, which they then blame on others.
Right.
Which reinforces their sense of victimhood, leading to an even deeper, more desperate need for validation from somewhere, anywhere. They end up pushing away self-respecting, healthy people, leaving them surrounded only by those who perhaps also crave drama or are equally codependent and willing to enable the pattern.
And this destructive pattern, it sounds like it strongly overlaps with what psychologists sometimes refer to as vulnerable narcissism. It's different from the grandiose type, right?
Correct. It's a really important distinction. Vulnerable narcissists, unlike the classic grandiose type, are driven more by insecurity than by inflated self-importance. They also rely almost entirely on excessive external validation and attention just to feel okay.
And when they don't get it.
When they don't get it, they experience significant insecurity, anxiety, and often feelings of confusion and emptiness because they genuinely struggle to identify and fulfill their own needs internally.
Yeah.
And because they are deeply, profoundly sensitive to criticism, they frequently resort to using manipulation, things like guilt trips, shame, passive-aggressive tactics, to manage others' perceptions of them and try to regain control when things don't go exactly their way.
Yeah.
It's all about controlling the narrative and the flow of validation.
Wow. Okay, so when we carry this desperate, high effort need for external validation into our daily interactions, it inevitably, well, poisons the well of genuine connection, doesn't it? Even in something as simple as a conversation, we can experience significant anxiety.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In everyday dialogue, the constant need to be affirmed, to be gotten, it creates this background feeling of anxiety or struggle or just plain effort for the
Yeah.
person seeking validation.
Oh, so.
Well, think about it. If we share an experience, maybe tell a story, and we don't receive an immediate acknowledging signal from the listener, no nod, no no verbal confirmation.
Yeah, that silence can feel awkward.
For someone needing validation, it can feel more than awkward. They can become internally, as one source put it, low-grade frantic.
That's a perfect phrase, low-grade frantic. Like you lose connection with the story you're actually telling because you're suddenly fixated on the listener's face, desperately trying to elicit some kind of response.
Exactly. You're trying to basically force the listener to hear you, to understand you, and ultimately to affirm that you exist and that your experience matters. We unconsciously award the other person complete power.
Power over our feelings.
Yes. The power to fulfill or deny this primal craving to be heard. And because this longing is so deep, giving that power away creates a profound sense of stress and desperation in the moment. You feel powerless in the fulfillment of your most basic emotional needs.
So you're not really connecting, you're performing to get a reaction.
You might be trying to get the listener to confirm your rightness, or maybe assuage your guilt about something, or see you in a specific positive light, all aimed at that single goal of feeling like you are enough in that moment.
Okay. This anxiety, this dynamic, it obviously scales up dramatically when we examine romantic relationships,
Wow.
where the stakes feel the highest for most people.
Oh, definitely. Research consistently links low self-esteem to a really toxic pattern of relationship conflict that's rooted in a direct demand for
What
approval.
demand?
Yeah. When the relationship moves past that initial courtship phase, where effusive praise is common.
The honeymoon period.
Right. When that naturally dials down, the partner who is addicted to affirmation really struggles. And they often initiate conflict specifically to provoke reassurance, to get that hit of validation again.
And the sources cited specific behaviors used to elicit this reassurance, behaviors that were actually deemed scientifically unattractive.
They are. Things like sulking, whining, deliberately displaying sadness or anger, just to elicit support and, well, chase from the partner.
So instead of saying, I feel insecure, they act out.
Exactly. Instead of communicating a need directly, I'm feeling a bit disconnected, can we talk?
Yeah.
The individual reverts to more juvenile forms of emotional expression, essentially saying, fix this sadness in me so I can feel validated and loved again.
Wow.
It's an attempt to control the partner's emotional labor and attention. And the deep irony is that these behaviors almost always push the partner away, creating the exact outcome, disconnection, abandonment that the validation seeker fears most.
And often, this constant demand for affirmation, this dissatisfaction, is what causes one or perhaps both partners to start looking elsewhere, which leads us into the devastating landscape of emotional affairs.
Yes, emotional affairs often begin not out of outright malice, but on that slippery slope of seeking fulfillment and self-validation outside the primary relationship.
Because they're not getting it inside, or feel they aren't.
Exactly. The person finds a third party who is willing, at least initially, to indulge their need for excitement, positive attention, ego reinforcement. They get caught up in the rush of feeling seen and important again, maybe like they did at the start of their main relationship.
Right.
And while these affairs might lack physical or sexual contact, the crucial damage is the secrecy and the fundamental betrayal of trust, and the willingness to prioritize one's own validation needs over their partner's feelings and the basic security of the partnership.
So the emotional energy that should be reinforcing the relationship gets diverted elsewhere.
Precisely. It leaks out.
And this betrayal is compounded, it seems, when manipulators specifically weaponize this human need for validation to gain control, both initially, like when starting a relationship, and later, maybe as punishment.
Oh, absolutely. Manipulators are often acutely aware of this deep-seated desire we all have to feel important and understood. They employ grooming tactics, starting with intense charm and wit, what's often called the love bombing or idealization phase.
Right, overwhelming attention.
Exactly. They are excessively attentive, they ask intriguing, deep questions, seem always available, making you feel uniquely special, uniquely understood. They are deliberately exploiting your desire for connection and compassion.
So they flood you with the very validation you might have been starving for.
Precisely. And while they're doing it, they're gathering emotional data about your vulnerabilities while simultaneously building your dependence on them. But
There's always a but.
there's always a but. The moment you stand in your power, maybe assert a boundary or disappoint them in some way, boom, the validation ceases instantly and the punishment begins.
Okay, what are the key punishing tactics we need to watch out for? The ones that directly target the validation seeker's vulnerability.
Well, the primary punishing tactics are things like attention withdrawal and that confusing hot and cold behavior. One minute they adore you, the next you don't exist.
Designed to make you anxious.
Exactly. This is intended specifically to provoke you into chasing them, begging for the attention and validation they initially provided so freely. It reinforces their sense of power and control, and it attempts to create a trauma bond, that cycle of abuse and intermittent reward.
And the silent treatment fits in here too.
Absolutely. A healthy person might say, I need some space, I need some time to process this issue. An abuser or manipulator, however, often disappears entirely. They employ the silent treatment or stonewalling, not to process, but to avoid accountability and maintain control.
And the silent treatment must be devastating for someone who craves validation because it denies the very confirmation of their existence they're desperate for.
It's profoundly damaging. The lack of consistency, the withdrawal, it sends a clear message. I don't value you as a whole person. I only want you on my terms when you please me. It's psychological punishment for not conforming to their desires. It makes you desperate to get back to that initial idolization phase, thereby solidifying their control over your self-worth.
Okay. So if the external world is this volatile and, frankly, potentially dangerous place full of people who either can't consistently provide validation or will actively weaponize our need for it, then the only real path forward, the true antidote to this hidden epidemic, has to be the internal revolution, shifting inwards.
Exactly. We have to understand what keeps us tethered to that external stage in the first place. When developmental psychologists look at the trajectory of adult maturity, the thing that gets us stuck at what they call stage one, which is basically mimicry and approval seeking,
Yeah.
is a fundamental sense of personal inadequacy. We
Right.
pour all our energy into conforming, into pleasing, because deep down we feel fundamentally flawed. We believe that our true selves, or maybe just our efforts, are never quite good enough.
So the ultimate solution then to move beyond that initial vulnerable stage is a kind of radical internal acceptance.
Yes. You have to internalize the acceptance that you will never be enough for everybody all the time. It's impossible.
Right.
And if you can truly accept that fundamental truth, the desperate necessity of chasing external validation just collapses. It loses its power. Therefore, you are liberated to start making decisions for yourself based on your own values, your own needs.
And that's how you begin to gain genuine control over your emotional equilibrium. It comes from inside.
Exactly. And our sources really highlight that this shift profoundly alters our definition of happiness itself.
How so?
Well, as you progress toward emotional maturity, happiness becomes based more on internal controllable values, things like your integrity, your compassion, the effort you put in,
Things you control.
things you control, and less on those external, ever-changing externalities like job titles, bank balances, or the approval of others. Think about all the research showing that external circumstances are actually terrible long-term predictors of happiness.
Right, like the classic example of the lottery winner versus the person who finds meaning after a profound tragedy. We touched on that earlier.
Let's unpack that contrast just a bit more because it's so critical. Studies of massive external changes, like winning the lottery, or conversely, suffering a paralyzing accident, often show something fascinating.
What's that?
The person's baseline happiness level, after a temporary spike or dip, very quickly returns to pretty much where it was before the event.
Really? Even winning the lottery?
Even winning the lottery. The lottery winner often feels isolated, overwhelmed, maybe paranoid. They can't sustain that external shift in happiness because they might lack a core internal foundation of worth or meaning.
Wow.
Conversely, many who suffer profound loss or injury think of the late Christopher Reeve after his accident report, finding a new, deeper appreciation for internal resilience, for purpose, for connection. The circumstances weren't the ultimate predictors. Their internal response and their recalibration of values were everything.
Which brings us squarely to the core mindset shift required. Embracing control and, crucially, responsibility.
Yes, taking responsibility is the necessary belief required to initiate any meaningful change. You have responsibility for everything that occurs in your life. Now, that doesn't mean you're responsible for the trauma happening to you or the environment you were born into.
Right, not blaming the victim.
Absolutely not. But You are always responsible for how you respond to it. The focus has to shift from the passive, why did this happen to me
Yeah.
question,
Yeah.
to the active, agentic question, okay, this happened, now what am I going to do about it?
That reframing, it turns us from passive victims of circumstances into active architects of our future, doesn't it?
Beautifully put, yes. And it allows us to cultivate what Carol Dweck famously called a growth mindset,
Okay.
where we see challenges not as threats, but as opportunities.
Yeah.
And past failures not as proof of inadequacy, but as necessary learning experiences. You remain committed to continuous growth.
So you internalize the belief that your skills, your knowledge, your resilience, they can all grow through dedicated effort. Your worth isn't fixed by a single achievement or failure.
Exactly. You detach your core worth from momentary outcomes.
Okay. So practically speaking then, what are the actionable strategies we can deploy, maybe starting today, to build that robust internal validation system and start dismantling that people-pleasing trap?
Right, the how-to. Well, the first absolutely foundational step to breaking free from dysfunctional patterns like people-pleasing is to establish boundaries.
Boundaries. We hear that word a lot.
We do, but it requires immense clarity, specificity, and frankly, courage about your personal limits and needs. A boundary isn't a threat, it's a clear statement of self-respect.
Okay, so if someone is new to boundaries, what does a specific actionable boundary look like in daily life? Give us an example.
Sure, it might involve setting strict time limits. For example, telling a demanding acquaintance or maybe a coworker, politely but firmly, I respect your needs, but I only take phone calls related to this specific project between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m.
So, very clear.
Very clear. Or practicing scripted refusals for common requests. Something like, that sounds interesting, but I honestly don't have the capacity for any new commitments this month. The key is clarity and consistency. That trains others to respect your limits, but just as importantly, it trains you to respect your own capacity.
Okay, step one, boundaries. What's next?
Second, we have to integrate what some call the power of the pause. Basically interjecting reflection before that automatic yes response kicks in.
Buying yourself time.
Exactly. Before agreeing to any request or even reacting emotionally to criticism, you must create a moment, even just a breath, for reflection. Ask yourself internally, how stressed am I actually going to be if I say yes to this? Or does this decision truly align with my current priorities and values? Crucially, practice saying things like, let me check my calendar and get back to you, or I need 24 hours to think about this properly. Research confirms that even a short pause significantly increases decision-making accuracy. It stops you from agreeing purely out of that fear of rejection or that craving for immediate approval.
Right. Okay, boundaries, pause. Third.
Third is the necessary, sometimes difficult work of challenging the internal critic, that negative voice, and the negative, often childhood-rooted stories we tell ourselves about ourselves.
The self-talk.
The self-talk. You have to actively challenge negative thoughts. Question the validity of beliefs that simply do not serve your well-being anymore. Identify those specific, often irrational thoughts that consistently worsen your self-image. I'm not smart enough. Nobody actually likes me. I always mess things up.
And then what? Just notice them.
Notice them.
Yeah.
Yes, but then actively explore the evidence for and against those beliefs. Is it really true you always mess things up? Probably not. Then consciously reframe the story into something more realistic, balanced, and supportive.
Like what?
For example, replacing, I completely failed that presentation, I'm just incompetent, with something like, okay, I struggled with parts of that presentation because I was anxious, but I learned a lot about pacing myself, and I'll apply that knowledge next time.
So it requires acknowledging both the flaw or the struggle and the capacity for growth and learning.
Exactly, which leads perfectly, actually, to a really powerful self-validation exercise mentioned in the sources. It's called the Soul's Reference.
Soul's reference. Okay, intriguing. What is it?
This strategy is about forcing a radical internal self-assessment, grounding yourself in your core identity, who you are, fundamentally, not just what you've done or achieved.
Okay, tell us exactly how the listener can do this Soul's reference exercise.
Okay, it's a private writing exercise. You describe yourself, keep it under about 500 words, but you write it in the third person. She is, or he has.
Okay, third person.
Yes. And there are two absolutely essential conditions. First, you must write from the perspective of someone who knows you deeply, unconditionally, and sees your full potential, like an ideal mentor or the most loving presence imaginable.
Got it.
Second, this imagined person must speak only of your fundamental qualities, your integrity, perhaps your resilience, your humor, your kindness, your great potential. Not a list of achievements or external accolades like degrees or job titles. They are writing a glowing, heartfelt recommendation for your life, for your being.
Wow. That sounds incredibly difficult, especially for someone conditioned to focus on their flaws or what they haven't achieved yet.
It is difficult,
Huh.
but it's transformative precisely because it forces you to articulate, maybe for the first time, who you are intrinsically, rather than just what you've done or what others think of you.
Hmm.
The goal is to stop craving external validation by starting to generate it internally. The thinking is, if you can't even imagine or admit this kind of unconditional positive regard for yourself in a private exercise, you certainly won't be able to truly hear it, absorb it, or be nourished by any support that does come your way in the real world. This document becomes your internal grounding reference, like an identity paper you carry within you.
I love that. The soul's reference. Okay. And finally, how do we use external feedback constructively? We can't just ignore the outside world completely, right? How do we take feedback without just defensively searching for praise?
That's a crucial point. We practice active open-mindedness. This means fundamentally redefining what we seek from the outside world when it comes to feedback.
How so?
Instead of only collecting praise or seeking confirmation, you must actively search for information that might contradict your initial positive conclusions or the external praise you received. You genuinely welcome feedback on flaws and errors, not as an attack, but as data to make corrections.
So you see it as helpful information.
It's exactly. Recognizing that skills, judgment, understanding these are always works in progress. This means genuinely yearning to receive constructive comments about how things could be improved, and then using that objective data to actually do better in the future, rather than treating any criticism as a personal attack on your fundamental worth.
Yeah.
You separate the feedback from your core value. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a remarkable amount of ground today, really unpacked this. We've learned that validation, at its core, is a basic human need. But an over-reliance on the external source leads to this chronic anxiety, the people-pleasing, the emotional instability, this hidden epidemic we talked about.
Yeah.
And the journey to recovery, it requires acknowledging these deeply ingrained habits, which often stem from childhood conditions, and consciously shifting your focus inward to establish your own core stability, building that internal anchor.
Absolutely. And the essential truth, I think, that emerges from all this is that the core of every healthy relationship, whether it's with others or, crucially, with yourself, is built on honesty and compromise
Yeah.
and self-acceptance. If you are so uncomfortable with your true self, if you hide it away because you genuinely don't believe anyone could love the authentic, flaws, failures, vulnerabilities, and all, you will likely never achieve the emotional equilibrium, the give and take necessary for a long-term, truly supportive relationship. That internal self-validation really has to precede successful, healthy partnership. You have to accept yourself before someone else truly can.
That makes so much sense. And as we close this deep dive on finding internal empowerment, moving away from external validation, there is one final kind of provocative concept from our sources we should probably contemplate. It's about the potential price of true self-assuredness.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The goal of self-validation is ultimately inner freedom, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes achieving a true measure of integrity and honesty, what philosophers sometimes call intellectual humility, can actually introduce a new form of anxiety.
Intellectual humility. Meaning what?
Meaning the ability to hold one's core beliefs humbly, to readily admit what we genuinely don't know or where we might be wrong. This kind of deep self-honesty, while liberating in one sense, can sometimes lead to greater existential discomfort
How so?
because it forces us to confront life's biggest questions about death, about meaning, about the vastness of our own ignorance without easy answers.
So if the toll of being truly honest and intellectually humble is that it exposes you to that persistent fundamental discomfort, maybe even existential dread, is it still worth the price of self-validation? That sounds kind of scary.
It could feel scary, but perhaps we could suggest that the final necessary act of self-validation, the ultimate source of inner freedom, is actually developing what could be called existential distress tolerance, which is simply the capacity to live peacefully with that persistent discomfort that inevitably accompanies acknowledging the limitations of human knowledge and the ultimate ambiguity of life itself. That radical acceptance, the willingness to live in the gray zone without needing external certainty or absolute answers, maybe that is the ultimate form of self-assuredness.
Yeah.
That might be the point where we truly stop needing the world or anyone in it to tell us that we are safe or that we are okay. We find that safety within the acceptance of uncertainty itself.